Very quickly.
There are 50 former national intelligence folks who said that what he's accusing me of is a Russian plant. They have said that this has all the 5 former heads of the CIA, both parties, say what he's saying is a bunch of garbage. Nobody believes it except his and his good friend Rudy Giuliani.
Joining me now, Senator Ron Johnson, ranking member of the Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations. Senator, I remember that like it was yesterday. I'm sure you do too, when they were all telling us that, hey, all the spies said it's Russian disinformation. What's the latest and greatest on all that?
Well, obviously, when we knew then that Joe Biden was lying. The FBI had taken possession of Hunter Biden's laptop in December 2019. And by the way, on the way out the door, they look over at McIsaac and said, it's our experience that people who don't talk about these things don't get in trouble. That's like a mob-like type of threat, isn't it? And that started their pre-sabotaging any disclosure of that laptop, which then carried forward because of Antony Blinken initiating that letter with 51 former intelligence officials that Joe Biden was referring to there. It was the greatest fraud ever perpetrated on the American public in a presidential election, from my standpoint. It should make sure all those 51 intelligence officials, including Antony Blinken, ought to have their security clearances yanked. They should not be allowed to work for the federal government. Those who are working now should resign, or they should be impeached, or they should be fired. It's just egregious. What's as egregious, the fact the mainstream media is by and large mum on this. They're not reporting this. They're not outraged by it because it favors their political ideology.
So Blinken, so he coordinates with these former intelligence officials, and it's bad, and it's deceitful, and it's horrible, but is it illegal? Did he break the law in any way?
Well, he certainly lied to the American public. And what we now know is he also lied to Congress in his interview with my staff. We were obviously investigating the Bidens back in 2019 to 2020. We invited the Bidens to come in. We didn't have the support within our committee to subpoena them, but we invited them to come in and proclaim their innocence. We did get people from the State Department coming in, people like George Kent, Amos Hochstein, others. We had invited and had scheduled an interview with Antony Blinken. In the end, he canceled on the interview, but then after the election, because he wanted to become Secretary of State, he decided to sit for a voluntary interview, which we transcribed. And so in that interview, we were asking about the meeting they had scheduled with Hunter Biden in May. It was canceled because Beau Biden died a couple days later, but it was rescheduled for July 20th. And so we're asking, what was the purpose of that meeting? He said, well, they just talked about Beau, which it's kind of hard to press him on that when you have no documentation. But we also asked him, well, how did you communicate with Hunter? Did you talk to him on the phone? He said, no. What about other types of communication? Emails, texts? No. Now we have proof that he was emailing Hunter Biden, so he lied bold-faced to Congress. That's a big no-no.
Can he be impeached for that? I'm not under the impression that's going to actually go through the United States Senate, but can he be impeached for that?
Well, certainly, I think the House ought to be impeaching people like Mayorkas, people like Antony Blinken. It only seems like Republicans or conservatives are ever prosecuted for lying to Congress, certainly in our recent past. What we're going to do is we're going to give Antony Blinken and his wife, who also was using her personal email as a State Department employee, trying to set up a phone call between the Deputy Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, her husband, and Karen Tramontano, who worked for Blue Star Strategies, who was the Democrat lobbying firm for Burisma, trying to get meetings with the Obama administration officials. Again, there was nothing to see here, right? There was no conflict of interest. There was no influence peddling by the vice president's son, was there? And of course, the media just looked the other way. Senator Grassa and I, we shared a report in September 2020, showed a vast web of very troubling financial foreign entanglements. Millions of dollars are being transferred. We've now gotten bank records from Cathay Bank confirming those Treasury reports, but the media back then just yawned. They accused us of soliciting and disseminating Russian disinformation. Have you heard that one before, Jesse? That's how the corrupt and complicit mainstream media covered our report. Not a word of our report has ever been debunked, proven false. It was all true then, it's true now, and now we're just peeling back layers of the onion that we expose, and we're going to get more and more detail. We're going to catch more and more of these people like Antony Blinken in lies. And I guess the first part of accountability is exposing them. Unfortunately, I can't prosecute people. That we'd have to turn those over to Merrick Garland. Don't have a great deal of hope there, but public exposure is a pretty good dose of accountability, and I guess I'll have to settle for that.
Let's circle back to the FBI part of this, because this is something we've talked about extensively on the show. It's something I'm glad you bring up often. The FBI, now there's a million FBI stories we could go into, but the FBI intimidation attempt, and the IRS actually got in on this too, by that poor sap who took Hunter Biden's laptop in. It is such a stunning abuse of power by the federal law enforcement agency. You could argue the entire agency should be paused while a major investigation is done. That's that big of a deal if they're running a protection racket on behalf of the Biden family. How do we stop it? Because all I see now is Christopher Wray going in front of Congress and saying, well, I can't comment on an investigation, and we get nowhere.
All right, well, let's talk about what the FBI did. Again, not only did they threaten McIsaac as they walked away with the computer, they had to be planning the story. Somebody was planning the story that it was all Russian disinformation. Obviously, Antony Blinken did that once the laptop was exposed. But for example, Senator Grassley and I, we were given an unsolicited briefing in August of 2020. Basically, FBI briefers, they said that we were targets of a Russian disinformation campaign. I knew it was a setup at the time. I asked them, well, what new information do you have to give us this briefing? They wouldn't tell us. We asked them, who directed this briefing? 3 public letters 2 years later, we still don't know who directed that briefing. So again, that was all laying the groundwork in case that computer ever surfaced, that Senator Grassley and I would certainly have second thoughts. And by the way, Jesse, to a certain extent it worked, because the day after we issued our report, McIsaac offered us the computer because he felt safe enough. If you got 2 U.S. senators investigating this, he felt safe enough to go in public with that computer, offer it to us. Guess who we went to determine whether this thing was real? What did they know about it? We went to the FBI. They gave us the runaround for weeks until McIsaac finally got impatient, turned that over to Rudy Giuliani, and the rest is history from that standpoint. But again, the FBI's game plan, their sabotage, to a certain extent, it did work. It worked for months. McIsaac didn't release that computer to the public. And of course, because it was covered up, because Antony Blinken initiated that letter, the American public didn't know about it. The Twitter files showed that the social media companies, mainstream media, covered it up. And Joe Biden is now president, leading our country down a path of destruction because of his socialist ways.